is decided, the question of consideration is decided in the affirmative. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose the gentleman from Georgia rise? The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Slaughter, the opinion of which I yield myself.
The gentleman suspend. The House is not in order. Will members please clear the well? The House is not in order. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend, the gentlelady from New York, Mrs. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purposes of debate only.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection. The gentleman suspend. The House will be in order. Members take their conversations from the floor. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, this rule that we have today provides for an hour of consideration on a bill that would do 2 very simple things. First, it would provide that if the House and the Senate fail to do their business, they fail to get paid. It's a pretty basic principle in America. No work, no pay. If the House and the Senate fail to get together and solve this budget crisis, no pay. All this resolution asks, all the underlying resolution asks, is that the Senate act. Senate act. They don't have to agree with the House. They just have to act, and send something to the House for negotiation and consideration. The second thing this bill does, and it's every bit as important as no work, no pay, is that this bill says, for whatever reason, if the Senate cannot act, if the Senate cannot pass something, they've defeated 2 things, but they have passed nothing, then the text of H.R. 1 will control the appropriations of the United States of America, and the government will not shut down. Will not shut down, because we will continue to operate under H.R. 1 funding levels until such time as the Senate can affirmatively pass yet a different bill. I rise in strong support of that underlying legislation, Madam Speaker, and I would like to yield the opening of this debate. I'd like to yield 5 minutes to my good friend, Mr. Womack.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks to the gentleman for yielding, and as a fellow freshman and colleague of his in this remarkable new class, I value his friendship and his sense of purpose. Madam Speaker, that is precisely why I rise today in support of my bill to prevent a government shutdown. I have a unique background, having helped a family start a broadcasting company that now spans in excess of 30 years. I served my country in uniform for more than 30 years, spent a little time in the financial services sector, and finally, for the last 12 years, having served as mayor of one of Arkansas's most dynamic cities and one of America's most livable cities, Rogers, Arkansas, and clearly one of our nation's most dynamic and fastest-growing regions. Madam Speaker, it was there I had the privilege of working side by side with executives from some of our leading corporations, Walmart, Tyson Foods, J.B. Hunt Trucking, all startup companies once upon a time and now leaders in their trade and with a global reach. These industry giants did not get where they are by ignoring their challenges. They confronted them. It's part of their genius. It is in this context that I share with my colleagues my greatest frustration, having been elected by the citizens of Arkansas's 3rd District to come to Washington, D.C. and help deliver our country to a better future, only to find myself and my colleagues mired in the muck of Beltway politics. We have a crisis on our hands, unsustainable deficits as far as the eye can see, a national debt nearing statutory limitation, an overreaching government bureaucracy intruding into the lives and businesses of every sector of society, people struggling to find work so they can pursue the American dream. And, Madam Speaker, they've elected this Congress to face our nation's toughest issues head on. And that's what House Republicans have been doing. We were 3 months into this fiscal year when we took our oaths of office, and without a budget, we went straight to work on the most pressing issue upon arrival, funding government for the rest of this year. And it is sad that as I make these remarks, all we have been able to show for our work now into the month of April are temporary measures that continue to distract us away from the real work ahead, the 2012 budget. Madam Speaker, this has to stop. The political gamesmanship going on in the upper chamber might make for good headlines in the Capitol press, but it is hurting our nation. That's why I've offered this bill to self-impose a deadline on Congress, and I'm asking my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 1255 to start the clock on the Senate to pass something we can agree to in funding government for the remainder of this year by April the 6th, or, assuming a government shutdown, expect to have our pay withheld until we can reach agreement. Every time we fail to address these issues, Madam Speaker, we add to the uncertainty now plaguing America. We contribute to the decline of our economy. We add to the burden of future generations, and we dash the hopes and dreams of millions of people who count on us every day. Madam Speaker, the time is now to act, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia reserves time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. I thank my friend from Georgia for yielding, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, for over 200 years, the House of Representatives has seen almost everything. From the days as a young nation to modern-day America, the exchange of ideas, the debate of legislation is a rich and proud tradition that moves our country forward. But unfortunately, today's legislation abandons this proud history and takes a new low in the United States House of Representatives. As you know, the new majority started off this session with reading every section and every piece of the Constitution of the United States to show our reverence for it. But this morning, that Constitution has been kicked under the couch out of sight, lest its presence in the room restrict what is attempting to be done here today. Indeed, this legislation proposes we throw away 200 years of legislative history and upends the fundamental process of how a bill becomes law. Despite the urgent and dire issues facing our constituents, here we are, the U.S. House of Representatives, considering a legislation that has no chance of becoming law. Today's legislation would deem a bill that the Senate has already voted down as passed by that very Senate. It would take a remarkable mind to even come up with such an idea. This notion, while clever, will never pass through the U.S. Senate. And let me remind you that what we're doing this morning, saying that we're going to bypass the Senate, would not do anything at all unless the Senate passed it of themselves, saying, forget about us. It's simply not going to happen. The Republican majority claims the bill is a solution to the government shutdown. I hope that the solution to the government shutdown are taking places in offices between Senate and House members and representatives of the administration as we speak. They are the people who can avoid that. The majority claims the bill is a solution. As I said, it is the only solution. America's in big trouble, and they think the solution is a government shutdown to meet the Democrat Party at the negotiating table, not to propose scrapping the entire legislative process, simply because the majority party refuses to tell the right wing of their party no. I'm sad to say that today's legislation is more befitting an entry to Grimm's fairy tales than to this august body. I think it demeans the House to pretend to do the impossible, to pretend to do what we can't. Does the majority believe that majority conferred supernatural powers upon them to bypass the United States Senate? In the House of Representatives, there are written rules for how the legislative process proceeds. Rules that were crafted by Thomas Jefferson, rules that have been tried and true since the founding of this legislative body. These rules have helped lead our country through debates much more fractured than this. From the Civil War to civil rights, the rules of the House have seen us through struggle and strife and kept our country strong. Today's bills would throw away these rules and very much upset Thomas Jefferson. Every one of us knows as schoolchildren that there is no way for a bill to become law without both chambers acting on it, a conference committee to meet if necessary, and the signature of the President of the United States. I wish that I were not standing here having to explain to my colleagues how a bill becomes law, and I said yesterday, and I must say it again, that I hope we have warped no children's minds. Anyone who may be watching the perversion of the process today, and any teachers who are guiding children through this process, take courage, because you can see a video that will explain once again, I am a bill. Never before has anyone seriously considered the idea that one House can pass a bill and decide it will be the law of the land. Hopefully, no party will ever try such a far-fetched tactic again. Just last year, the procedure to deem and pass legislation through the House was derided by Republicans as the slaughter solution, a procedure we ultimately chose not to use. And at the time, Speaker Boehner called the deem and pass process an affront to every American, and now he brings his own deem and pass legislation to the floor. Finally, I want to speak to the process that leads us to the floor today. The proposed bill has seen no committee consideration of any kind. There has been no opportunity whatever for public input. It required an emergency meeting of the Rules Committee last night to rush it to the floor today, and no chair or ranking member of the 4 committees responsible for this legislation even came to the Rules Committee, the Democrat ranking members saying they had never heard of the bill. They certainly did not want to come up and debate it. So now we're considering another closed rule, a process that is certainly is far from the most open and transparent Congress in history we were promised. If we're moving forward with emergency legislation under a closed rule, it should be for one reason, to create jobs. We've gone 13 weeks without a single jobs bill brought to the House floor by the majority. In fact, all of us know that that is the overriding fear in the United States today. Instead, we debate legislation so far-fetched that it will never proceed beyond this House floor. We should not waste another minute ignoring the needs of millions of Americans, those who have no job and are losing their homes, while debating fantastic legislation that will never become law. This is a bad joke on the American people, not a serious solution to our problems. I urge my colleagues to think again about the proud tradition of the House of Representatives and how proud each of us are to be able to represent constituents here, and to try to do it in a sensible way that can really move the country forward, and not, as we are doing today, simply again wasting time. I urge everyone to vote no on today's rule and no on the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 60 seconds to apologize to the gentlelady from New York. I'm told by my team here that normal order would have been to yield to you before I yielded to my colleagues, and I'm new, and I apologize for going out of order in that way.
There's no need to apologize. It's perfectly all right.
I would just say, as I beg the gentlelady's forgiveness, that as a freshman, I'm just trying to get things done. I'm trying to make things happen, and this bill is one of those steps along the way.
We all were freshmen once. We understand.
I thank the gentlelady, and Madam Speaker, I yield as much time as he may consume to my good friend and leader, the chairman of the Rules Committee, gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer.
Gentleman from California is recognized first,
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
without objection.
Madam Speaker, I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my friend from Lawrenceville for not only managing this rule, but as one of the lead co-sponsors of this legislation. I hate the fact that we are doing this bill. I don't like it at all, Madam Speaker, but I like even less the prospect of a government shutdown. We are determined to do everything we possibly can to ensure that we don't shut down the government and potentially create a scenario whereby our men and women in uniform are not compensated and all the other things that we've talked about that would be serious problems that we would face if we had a government shutdown would take place. We want to prevent that. That's the reason that we are here dealing with this very, very unpleasant situation. Now, why is it, Madam Speaker, that we are here today? We're here today because for the first time since passage of the 1974 Budget and Impoundment Act, we saw a United States Congress fail to pass a budget. That's what happened last year. We also, for the first time, saw the failure to pass appropriations bills. Now, there was an attempt to do it under a closed process, and we know we're in the process of changing that, but the bills weren't passed. And so the last Congress dumped in our laps in December a continuing resolution which extended the operations of the federal government to March 4th of this year. Well, Madam Speaker, we know that there was a new Congress elected on November 2nd of last year, and I'm very happy about that. Mr. Woodall, Mr. Canseco, other new members are here. There are 87 new Republicans, 9 new Democrats who have joined the 112th Congress. For my party, it's the largest gain that we've had in nearly 3/4 of a century, since 1938. And it's not simply a gain for my party, Madam Speaker. It was a message that was sent by the American people. All across this country, the American people said, we've had it. We're up to here. We need to create jobs, get our economy growing, and we need to reduce the size and scope and reach of the federal government. Now, we constantly hear this argument that from our friends on the other side of the aisle that we're not creating jobs, that we're not focusing, we're not taking action to create jobs. Well, Madam Speaker, as we know, the Joint Economic Committee has just come out with a study looking at nations around the world, and it is very clear. Everything that we do to reduce government spending, Madam Speaker, has, based on empirical evidence that we have, worked to grow economies and create jobs, and that's exactly what we're going to be able to do here. Now, the other thing that's very sad is that 41 days ago, we passed the measure that we're debating here. 41 days ago, we had, as my friend from Lawrenceville said, a virtually unprecedented debate of 90 hours. Democrats and Republicans, for the first time in decades, had an opportunity on a continuing resolution to debate and pass their amendments. Members on both sides of the aisle had amendments that succeeded during that 90 hours of debate, which was a challenge for all of us, but we went through it. That's the work product that we have before us. This House worked its will, and that's what we were able to achieve. 41 days ago, we did that, Madam Speaker, and the other body, our colleagues in the Senate, have done absolutely nothing other than defeat 2 measures. This one, H.R. 1, and they defeated their Democratic proposal. So no action has been taken. Speaker Boehner has consistently been saying not only where are the jobs, and we're all gratified that the positive signs of our getting our fiscal house in order played a big role in creating 216,000 non-farm payroll jobs last month and brought the unemployment rate from 8.9 down to 8.8%. Positive indications that have come about because we're starting to get our fiscal house in order. But, Madam Speaker, our friends in the other body have failed to act on dealing with this issue, and so that's why we are here today as we look. April Fool's Day, everyone's been talking about that, but 1 week from today, it's not going to be a joke at all if we face the prospect of a government shutdown, and we do 1 week from today.
And that's why we feel that it's very important for us to pass this measure again, remind our colleagues, some of whom may have become a little forgetful. They may not know that it was 41 days ago that we actually sent this measure over to them. And so, Madam Speaker, we want to do that again. And I hope very much that we'll be able to do it. Again, I don't like a lot of what's in here. I don't like the fact that we're here, but it's because of this crisis that we're here. Now, we're dealing with very serious international challenges around the world. And, Madam Speaker, I'm particularly proud that the House Democracy Partnership, which my colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Price, and I have the privilege of leading, has had a group of newly elected parliamentarians from Indonesia, Pakistan, Lebanon, and Iraq visiting us this week, observing this institution. And I heard an interview this morning with one of our colleagues in the other body who said, what kind of signal does it send to people who are working to develop democratic institutions, political pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination in their countries? What kind of signal does that send when the United States of America can't even come together and keep the federal government going? Now, many of those people happen to be here right now with us, Madam Speaker, and they are observing what is taking place. And we need to show them that we can get our work done. And we need to show the American people that the message that was sent to us last November 2nd is one that has been heard. And so, Madam Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of this rule and in favor of the underlying legislation so that we will be able to take an unpleasant situation, ensure that the government doesn't shut down a week from today, and ensure that we can get back to the work that we're supposed to be doing this year, not cleaning up last year's work, and we should do that as expeditiously as possible. And I thank my friend again for his thoughtful leadership on this very important issue, his management of the rule, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia continues to reserve. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Montgomery.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this closed rule and to the ridiculous, meaningless, and unconstitutional underlying legislation. Today, the Republican leadership has brought forward a bill that they call, without any apparent trace of irony, the Government Shutdown Prevention Act of 2011. This bill was introduced on Wednesday and rushed to the floor without the 72 hours of notice that the Republicans promised. Even though the bill was referred to 4 different committees, not a single hearing has been held. Not a single markup has taken place. Where is the openness? Where is the fairness? This process is lousy. This bill would not only have no practical effect, it's not even remotely constitutional. If my friends on the other side of the aisle want to put out a press release or issue a series of talking points, hey, it's a free country. But to waste the time of the House on something this ridiculous is an insult to the American people. We should be talking about jobs and the economy, not debating silliness that is supposed to appeal to the GOP's right-wing base. If my Republican friends want to avert a government shutdown, and make no mistake, because of your intransigence, because of your insistence on cutting everything from Pell Grants to the National Institutes of Health, this is in your hands. This is in your hands. But if you want to avert a government shutdown, I have an idea. Pick up the phone. Send a note. Or better yet, engage in meaningful negotiations with the Senate and the White House. Enough pontificating. Enough polarization. Do your job. My Republican colleagues like to talk a lot about the sanctity of the Constitution. They made a big display of reading the entire document on the floor of the House at the beginning of this Congress. Apparently, they weren't paying very much attention. For the benefit of my Republican colleagues, let me read from Article 1, Section 7. Quote, every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it becomes a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it, end quote. Instead, what this bill says is that if the Senate hasn't passed the continuing resolution by April 6th, then H.R. 1 would be deemed as passed by the Senate, signed by the President, and enacted into law. You have got to be kidding me, Madam Speaker. If this is the new standard that the Republicans are going to use, I have a few ideas of my own. I'd like to introduce a bill that says that the House deems the Red Sox to have won the 2011 World Series. It wouldn't mean anything, it wouldn't be constitutional, but it sure would be popular in Massachusetts. Madam Speaker, this would be laughable if it weren't so outrageous. I urge my colleagues to reject this closed rule and the underlying legislation, and I urge my Republican friends to go back to the negotiating table and negotiate in good faith.
Gentleman's time's
with the other
expired.
body.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, a freshman from Texas, Mr. Canseco.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes. From Texas, excuse me.
I thank the Speaker and I thank my colleague from Georgia. Madam Speaker, the House of Representatives is attempting to prevent the government from shutting down. We have to do so because the Senate, under the leadership of Senator Harry Reid, hasn't passed a bill to fund the government for the remainder of the year. It's now been 41 days since the House passed our bill, H.R. 1. The lack of Senate action certainly isn't because they haven't had the time. Since the passage of H.R. 1, the Senate has had time to pass legislation like the bill designating March 11th as World Plumbing Day. Senator Reid's excuse for not passing the bill? House Republicans passed extreme spending cuts. Despite the $61 billion in spending cuts in H.R. 1 being the largest spending cut since World War II, it amounts to approximately a 2% cut of what the CBO projects the federal government will spend in 2011. That's cutting spending by approximately 2 cents for every dollar we are projected to spend. Given that the federal government is borrowing approximately 40 cents out of every dollar we spend and sending the bill to our children and grandchildren, cutting 2 cents out of every dollar hardly seems extreme or excessive. The only thing that is extreme and excessive is the desire of Washington liberals to spend the hard-earned money of the American people on the federal government's priority, leaving the American people unable to spend on their priorities. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, a member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Polis.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, we do face a real issue here before us today, a government shutdown in a week that could hurt our security and safety as a nation and hurt our recovery and job growth. And this real issue deserves a real discussion, a discussion and agreement between the House and the Senate and the President. We have 6 days left to negotiate, and yet here today, instead of contributing to a solution, the House Republicans are bringing about a constitutional crisis on top of the funding crisis. That's the last thing that our fragile economy needs. Madam Speaker, yesterday in Rules Committee, and I think this might very well be the first time that this has occurred on Rules Committee in my, just over 2 years, every witness that came to visit our committee was opposed to what we're doing here today. The witnesses were unanimous that this approach is unconstitutional and that this approach is ill-advised. Now, in my time on Rules Committee, I don't think we've ever had such unanimity among the witnesses that have come before us. Madam Speaker, I'd like to submit for the record Article 1 of our Constitution.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Article 1, Section 7 clearly states that every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it became a law, be presented to the President of the United States. Now, what's being done with this bill is entirely different. I'd like to show our friends a very basic lesson in how a bill becomes a law. This is our friend, a bill. For a bill to become a law, it needs to pass the House and the Senate before it goes to the President. Now, we all know if there's differences between the House and the Senate version, they can be resolved through a conference committee, or it can be sent with an amendment back to the other body to accept that, as we routinely do. What is being done in this case is this little guy. This little guy is deeming from the House that it has passed the Senate. Now, this is particularly unusual because not only has this bill not passed the Senate, it's actually specifically been rejected by the Senate. And now a bill is going to the Senate asking them to deem that they have passed something that they have actually rejected. It's some sort of Orwellian doublespeak of conforming some sort of alternate version of reality with regard to this deem and pass measure. Now, there are some things we could be doing in this House, and I hope we do. In addition to the good faith negotiations, which this constitutional crisis undermines, we could be taking up Senate Bill 388. Senate Bill 388 would make sure that members of Congress don't get paid during a government shutdown. Now, this is news to most of the American people because you know what? Most federal workers, they're not going to get paid if the government shuts down. But you know who does get paid? Those of us who are speaking here before you today. That's the current law. We can change that law today. The Senate sent over the bill that passed unanimously in the United States Senate to ensure that members, I asked for additional 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. The Senate sent over a bill unanimously that would make sure that members of Congress didn't get paid if the government shut down. We can take up that bill today. It's been sitting here at the House desk because Republican leadership has not taken up that bill. We can send it on to the President of the United States, who could sign that bill, make sure that the incentive of members of Congress is to come to the table, and we are in the same boat as the other federal workers with regard to a government shutdown. It's time to get serious about solving how we're going to fund the operations of government and not put a constitutional crisis on top of the funding crisis. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I'd like to ask my good friend Mr. Polis if he'd be kind enough to lend me his chart for a moment. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? Would you be kind enough to lend me your chart for a moment? I so appreciated that. Could I borrow your chart up here for just a moment? Would you allow me to use that?
If you could bring the chart over.
And I want to say that, and I thank my friend for sharing with me. That's the kind of thing that goes on. I mean, folks often see the frustration on the House floor. You often see the tempers at their height. Thank you very much, sir. But the kind of thing that goes on behind the scenes that you don't usually see is exactly the kind of thing I grew up with on TV, and I thank the gentleman for bringing this chart this morning. Our colleague, Mr. Hastings, actually sang this song for us yesterday, and it was a wonderful treat in the Rules Committee. I think we would all agree. But as you know, when you listen to this song, Madam Speaker, once the bill passes the House, it goes to the Senate, and the Senate acts. The Senate acts. Now, there's all these pleas for negotiation. There's the suggestion that as if we're not doing enough on the House side. Longest debate this House has had, most amendments, more amendments, in fact, on H.R. 1, the bill that's contained in this underlying resolution, than we had on all appropriation bills combined over the past 4 years. This is the proud work product of the House, H.R. 1. Here's the work product of the Senate, Madam Speaker. It's right here. As my colleague asks, pleads, in fact, that we negotiate with the Senate. Here's what the Senate has offered. How do you negotiate with that, Madam Speaker? How do you negotiate with that? This is what we learned about. This is what our students are studying across the nation. This is what the Senate has given us to work with. Now, you tell me as a freshman, what is it that I'm supposed to do? What is it that I'm supposed to do when the Senate fails to act? And what we have done is to say, if the Senate fails to act, you can't pass anything, I don't know why. So just go ahead and fund the government, prevent the government shutdown, fund the government at H.R. 1 levels, and let's continue that negotiation. I look forward to the day when we don't have a blank sheet here.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
Yes, you're correct that the House has passed a continuing resolution. However, that specific resolution has actually failed in the United States Senate. It's actually rejection. On top of that, the third body, the executive, has threatened a veto of that. What this calls for is some sort of deal that everybody can do to ensure the government continues to offer.
I thank my friend, because he's absolutely right, and that's critically important. There are those who would have you believe that the House is insisting that it's its way or no way at all. But that's not the case at all. We just did our job here, and we're waiting for the counteroffer. How do you negotiate with this? You can't, Madam Speaker, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance. A gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I know it's April Fool's Day, but I still am amazed by the jokes or the myths that are being relayed by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I like my colleague from Georgia, but I just want to say 3 things. First of all, I heard the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, get up and say that the Republican policies with this CR were creating jobs, and he cited the fact that the unemployment numbers went down from 8.9 to 8.8 in March. If anyone thinks that by passing 2 or 3 week CRs that you're going to create jobs and somehow improve the economy and lower the unemployment rate, you know, I've got a bridge to sell you. The fact of the matter is that every economist is telling us that this Republican CR kills jobs. Economic Policy Institute shows that the Republican CR would destroy more than 800,000 jobs, and I could go through the list. So the myth that they're creating jobs and helping the economy with this is simply not true. Second thing is, the gentleman keeps talking about the Congress not getting paid if there's a shutdown. Well, S-388, to stop member pay during a shutdown, passed the Senate unanimously over a month ago with Republican leader Mitch McConnell's support. It's been sitting right here at the House desk because the Republican leadership refuses to take it up. That bill could become law today if they wanted to bring it up. Simply bring it up. Don't mask what you're doing with this CR by talking about members getting paid. You could bring that bill up at any time. Now, the third myth is this idea that the Republicans are not preventing a government shutdown. They're the ones that are preventing a government shutdown because they refuse to compromise. There are negotiations going on with the Senate, but it's the Tea Party and the right wing of the Republican Party that keeps insisting that it's my way or the highway. Pass H.R. 1, pass their CR, or do nothing. Yesterday there was a rally on the Mall. What did the Tea Party cry out? They said, cut it or shut it. Either go along with my bill or shut the government down. So don't say you're trying to prevent a government shutdown. You're doing just the opposite. Let's not continue with all these myths today.
Gentleman's
April
time
Fool's
has expired.
Day. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Michigan, Mr. McCotter.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in support of the rule because I think for 2 reasons that are very important. The first is so that we can continue to discuss what happens when you bury prosperity beneath big government. But the second is because we also need to be reminded that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It seems to me that when you have an impasse on the budget, it is born of the difference, very fundamentally, that one side wants less spending and one side would like more spending. And there are a bunch of members who wind up in the middle. Now, I think we can all concede, whatever our positions, that reducing federal spending is hard. Certainly past precedent proves that. Past precedent also proves something else, that historically the way you break a log jam in Congress is to log roll. That is the process whereby members who have differences split that difference and spend more money to make each other happy and to serve their constituents as they think best. What we've done in this bill is to incentivize spending. Because I want you to think of the situation we're in. You are now telling a politician that you will get no money in your pocket until you spend money from someone else's pocket. You are telling them that the fastest way to end an impasse is to settle. And you are making it harder for those who would seek more spending reductions to stand their ground and fight for it. So that is why I support the rule and why I oppose the underlying bill, because I will not pave the fiscal road to hell with good intentions or your money. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from New York.
Yes. I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Gentlewoman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes. She changed her scarf. She had it on.
Madam Speaker, I'm really dumbfounded as to why we're here today. I sat back and I closed my eyes and I remembered that my favorite grade was 5th grade. And now I remember why my favorite grade was 5th grade, because as my colleague from Colorado has pointed out, I remember in 5th grade playing how a bill becomes a law, and I was the House, and somebody else was the Senate, and another one of our 5th graders, set of 5th graders, were the Constitution. And what we learned, you have to pass a bill out of the House, it's got to go to the Senate, goes on to the President, he signs it, it becomes a law. Pretty simple. Well, here we are in 5th grade yet again. But I want to say here, Madam Speaker, is that I really I oppose the rule, I oppose the underlying bill, and I'm recollecting that just over a year ago we had this exact discussion about deem and pass. And so while an elephant never forgets, it seems that the party of elephants is just forgetting every day. And if this were only about mascots, forgetting would be okay, but it's not okay because it's not just about mascots, it's about the American people. And so I want to remind the American people about the words of some of our leaders here in this House when deem and pass was put on the table just a year ago. Our now Speaker John Boehner called it a, quote, scheme and plot that set a precedent that was, quote, one of the most outrageous things that he'd seen since he'd been in Congress. That was on March 19, 2010. Mike Pence said it's a, quote, trampling on the traditional rules of the House and Senate, even on the Constitution of the United States. That was on March 16, 2010. Eric Cantor termed it a, quote, malfeasant manner, unquote, and those who might support it as having, quote, discharged the duties of their offices on March 18, 2010. And here we are, the elephants never forgetting, but the elephants repeating. With that, I yield.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume to associate myself with the gentlewoman's remarks. Those comments on the bottom of the board are as true today as they were a year ago. There's no deeming in this bill, and I give my colleagues on the other side of the aisle the benefit of the doubt that they know that, and that's just the spin for today. There's no deeming in this bill. This bill says one thing and one thing only about H.R. 1, and that is that if the Senate cannot act, we're going to give the Senate some cover. If the Senate doesn't want to commit to H.R. 1 for the remainder of the year, we'll give them the opportunity to incorporate the language of H.R. 1 into this bill, send it to the President's desk for his signature, make it the law of the land, while we continue to work to sort out our budget differences. Now, that's critically important. One thing and one thing only this bill does, gives the Senate the opportunity to say, you know what, for whatever reasons, and the reasons are still a mystery to me, we can't pass legislation in the Senate. We can defeat things all day long, but we can't pass anything. I'm not sure why that is. This bill says, but none of us want a shutdown. Now, I got to be honest, Madam Speaker, I'm beginning to wonder if none of us want a shutdown is actually a true statement, because there's some folks who seem to be driving us right down that road. This is a bill that just gives us another option, another arrow in our quiver to say, if you cannot act, Senate, if you are paralyzed by inaction, pass this bill. And we'll continue those negotiations while H.R. 1 is the law of the land. And I would like to say to my friend from Michigan, I thank him for his support of the rule. I hope I can persuade him to support the underlying resolution. He suggested that by penalizing members of Congress for failure to act and curbing our salaries, that would somehow encourage a compromise that would spend more out of other people's pockets. I certainly share that fear if that's what this bill does, but it does not. What it says is the very best deal we've been able to negotiate among ourselves here in the House was H.R. 1, the most conservative deal, actually the most conservative and the most liberal, the work product of all 435 of us. It's what came out of this House in H.R. 1. And it says let's fund at those levels that we have already agreed on, that has already been the work product of the People's House, the most responsive body in politics. Let's incorporate that as our baseline while we continue to discuss. So it's not going to spend an additional nickel out of anyone's pocket, Madam Speaker. It is only going to say to the Congress and the Senate, if you do not work, you do not get paid. And I cannot think of a constituent back home who would disagree with that. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 1255, and I say to my friend from Georgia that no matter how he slices it, if you are saying in this law, in this bill, that if the Senate fails to act, then H.R. 1 becomes law, check Webster's, that's deeming. This is blatantly unconstitutional, deem-and-pass legislation offered by Representative Womack, and it makes me wonder what sort of April Fool's Day joke is being played on the American public. To be sure, Congressman Womack cited constitutional authority for his bill. First, he cites Clause 7 of Section 9 of Article 1 of the Constitution for the concept that Congress has the authority to spend money by passing laws. He then cites Clause 1 of Section 8 of Article 1 for the idea that Congress shall have power to lay taxes and pay the debts. But what my Republican colleague fails to cite is Clause 1, Section 1, Article 1 for the fundamental concept that Congress shall consist of a Senate and the House of Representatives. As much as we don't like that much of the time, that is what the Constitution says. I also refer him to Clause 2, Section 7 of Article 1, that lays out the basic constitutional construct that a bill becomes a law if and only if it is passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President. The House has no magic wand to do this all on its own. Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, is not coming to save you. H.R. 1 is more like a product of the Wicked Witch of the West. Perhaps at the start of the next Congress, we should show the Schoolhouse Rock video, I'm Just a Bill, as a refresher on how a bill really becomes a law. It appears reading the Constitution on the floor hasn't stuck so well. Now, while today is April Fool's Day, it also feels a bit like Groundhog Day, because here we are again deeming to pass the majority's job-killing spending bill, H.R. 1. In case anyone has forgotten, that job-killing spending bill would destroy 700,000 jobs and threaten the economic recovery now underway. The Democratic minority remains committed to our goals for the 112th Congress to create jobs, strengthen the middle class, and responsibly reduce the deficit. I yield back the balance of my time and say defeat this misguided legislation and make sure that members of Congress aren't paid when government employees aren't.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the week ends, there is the welcome news that American employers added 216,000 jobs. But this is still a night for 15 million people where they didn't get one of those jobs. And it's going to be another sleepless night, another Friday without a paycheck. And what did the majority in the House of Representatives do about that this week? Well, early in the week, they took a bill to cancel out a program that helps people that are trying to keep their homes and pay their bills out of foreclosure. Then we spent a day pretending we were the District of Columbia Board of Education, debating about how the D.C. schools should be organized. Today is going to be capped off by debating a bill that any fifth grader would understand is unconstitutional because it does not require the House and the Senate to act. There are serious discussions going on about what we ought to do in this country, but the most serious thing we ought to do is work together to create an environment so that entrepreneurs, large and small, could create jobs. Instead, what we are doing is wasting yet another week. This is week 14. Yet another day, yet another session having a fairly superficial political discussion about a bill that simply isn't constitutional and doesn't make any sense. Why don't we put on the floor a bill that reduces the deficit, cuts the subsidies to the oil companies, and puts some of the money into putting Americans back to work, building clean water systems and roads and schools? Why don't we do that? At a minimum, what we're going to do today is vote for something I do support. If there's a government shutdown, and I sure hope there isn't, we shouldn't get paid either. We can agree on that. Let's put that on the floor. But for goodness sakes, Can't there come a day in this House when we actually work together on a jobs bill instead of another week of failure? I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume to say that one of the great joys of serving in this body is when you get to take a stand on something you really believe in. And while I have great respect for my friend from New Jersey, and I know he represents his constituency well, my constituency does not believe that the government has the power to create a single job. Not one. In fact, my constituency believes that every single person that the United States government hires is a job that would have been done in the private sector, would have been done better in the private sector, would have spurred the private sector economy, but instead we're sucked that into the federal government. We understand that entrepreneurs create jobs. Entrepreneurs create jobs. And I will say, as we continue to count the days since the House has passed H.R. 1 and the Senate hasn't acted, it's the same number of days, Madam Speaker, since I came to this floor, probably shortly after my friend from New Jersey spoke on H.R. 1 rule, to say, if you want to do away with those tax subsidies, if you want to go after the oil companies, if you want to go after the lobbyists, if you want to go after the special exceptions, join me on H.R. 25, the fair tax. Not one new friend of mine from the other side of the aisle has joined me since that speech. Only bill in Congress. I would love to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank my friend, and I thank him for his passion. I thought I heard the gentleman say a minute ago that every job created in the public sector sucks away money that could create a private sector job. Did the gentleman say that?
To be clear, Mr. Andrews, I absolutely said that the government cannot create jobs. It can hire people that would otherwise have been hired in the private sector.
I would just, if the gentleman would yield, would ask him if he would apply that definition to our people in the military. Are there jobs?
No, I reclaim my time. I'm so thankful for you for bringing that up, because I actually intended to speak to that. And that's critically important, Madam Speaker, and it's been ignored throughout this whole debate. Do you know what happens in a government shutdown? Those heroes of this country do not get paid. Now, I understand that. In a government shutdown, this is a bill to provide a special rule so that we don't get paid, but by the ordinary function of law, our men and women who serve this country at home and abroad in uniform do not get paid. Do not get paid. Now, it is alarming to me, because I know you share my passion for that. It is alarming to me that this is the only solution that has been brought to the floor. I'm one of the co-sponsors who brought it to the floor, and we've had nothing but contempt for this effort. I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all of good government. In fact, I'd associate myself with Chairman Dreyer's remarks. I hate that we have to do this. You know, I've been in Congress for 90 days, Madam Speaker. I haven't gotten to work on the new agenda yet. My time has been wholly consumed with trying to sort out the problems from last year. And it's frustrating to me as someone who wants to look to the future and not look to the past. But I thank the gentleman for bringing up our men and women in uniform, because they are outrageously disadvantaged by a government shutdown. Say what you want to, because I know my friend would agree with me.
Would the gentleman yield?
When we have a Tea Party rally on the Mall, they are 100% supportive of our men and women in uniform and want to see those folks get paid. This is the only bill to do that. I'd be happy to yield my
Would the gentleman say that people who are FBI or DEA agents are sucking money out of the Treasury could be used for private sector jobs?
Well, again, and I want to point out, Madam Speaker, one of the great joys of the job is being able to work together with colleagues across the aisle. I think Mr. Andrews is 100% right. 100% right. And because what he struck on is one of those narrow opportunities where the Constitution actually gives the government the responsibility to act. And that's one of the wonderful things, Madam Speaker. I may be new here on Capitol Hill, but the job came with an instruction book. It's kind of neat. Came with an instruction book. It's the United States Constitution, and it tells us what it is we should and shouldn't be doing, what it is we should and shouldn't be funding. And while I would love to yield to the gentleman, I suspect what I would hear, if I can presume, is a discussion of the constitutionality of this provision that's here before us today. Good news is, I read the instruction book before I came to the floor today, and I'm very comfortable with where we're headed. And I would encourage my friends to support us on this resolution. Again, it's not the end-all, be-all of government. It's a step in the right direction. And if you're going to have an all-or-nothing attitude, I'm not sure that we're going to get things done. I wish you would work with me incrementally to make this happen. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance. Gentlewoman from New York.
To respond, I'd like to yield 15 seconds to Mr. Andrews.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I appreciate my friend. I would just, with all due respect, say that it's not an instruction book, it's an owner's manual. And the owner's manual, the Constitution says for a bill to become law, the House has to pass it and the Senate has to pass it. That's why this bill is unconstitutional. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, who's helped create a few jobs while he's been here.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
That was pretty astounding. Apparently, the gentleman is unfamiliar with the portions of the Constitution referring to what were then post roads. The government can't create a job. We create incredible wealth, millions of jobs, by facilitating the infrastructure of this country, which is paid for by the taxpayers. And those are all private sector jobs. They're contracted out to the best bid. So the gentleman has a little bit to learn. I realize he is new here, and he has been sent here on a fool's errand. Let's keep the Republican freshman busy while behind closed doors your speaker's cutting a deal. Things haven't changed around here all that much. And you're down here pretending that somehow we have become the omnipotent, unicameral legislature and the rulers of America. The President, the Senate, be damned. Now, I'm pretty fed up with the Senate, too, and I share your low opinion of them, but they're a problem. Now, let's kind of think this through. We can pass a bill here, it becomes a law. Now, in the last Congress, the House passed 300 bills that never came up in the Senate. Are those all laws today? Boy, we got some catching up to do here. There were a lot of good bills that died in the Senate. 300 laws. Great. Now, but what if the Senate passes a bill and the House doesn't? Does that become a law? Well, I guess, they could deem themselves the unicameral, omnipotent legislative branch, which I think they feel like they are all the time anyway. So then anything they pass, we don't take up, becomes a law. Now, wait a minute. What if the President takes a bill that someone's introduced here that hasn't been debated and voted on by either House, and he signs it? Does that become a law? What a brave and wonderful, new, efficient world we have. We can have two branches and three competing places passing what they deem to be laws. Now, come on. Let's get real here. We read the Constitution on the second day of this Congress, and in fact, Joe Wilson, we all remember Joe Wilson, you lie, he read Article 1, Section 7.2 on the floor. But apparently he and many others on that side didn't take it to heart. It's pretty darn specific. It's got to pass the House and the Senate in identical form and be agreed to by the President of the United States. We cannot deem anything. In your fantasy world, we can deem everything. Now, I would perhaps, the Constitution's a little too technical. I would recommend what I give out to school kids, how our laws are made. It would be a good primer for the Republican freshmen who are being duped.
Gentleman's time has expired. I would remind members that they should refrain from improper references to the United States Senate. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining on both
Gentleman
sides?
from Georgia has 3.5 minutes remaining. Gentlewoman from New York has 6.25 minutes remaining.
Yeah, with that, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I am pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, one of our freshmen, Mr. Deutsch.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the gentleman from New York. I've been listening to this debate about the Constitution. I am proud to serve in a body that has such respect for the Constitution, yet I couldn't find this provision that was applicable today until just a moment ago. Apparently, my friends on the other side of the aisle are using a special April Fool's edition of the Constitution that has the following provision in it. It says, when a majority party in the House of Representatives is immovably committed to shutting down the government unless the President of the United States and the United States Senate get on board with their plan to destroy 700,000 jobs and cripple the nation's economic growth, that House majority can simply deem their plan the law without a vote by the Senate or the signature of the President, as they are null and void. There you have it, Madam Speaker. What we've clearly seen here is that my colleagues are so bent on adding 700,000 Americans to our unemployment line that they can simply declare the Senate of the United States and the President of the United States null and void. This bill tramples on our Constitution. It is bad
Gentleman's
political
time has
theater,
expired.
and I urge my colleagues to oppose it.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 15 seconds to say what I fear will fall on deaf ears, and that is that H.R. 1255 will not become the law of the land until the Senate passes it and the President signs it. Senate passes it and the President signs it. That is the only thing we're talking about doing here today, with that I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
This is my last.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I quarrel with the understanding of the gentleman on the other side of the aisle about the Constitution. There are 3 branches, the judiciary, the legislature, and the President. Thank God there are, because that means that we have the ability to be reasonable and practical, recognizing we have a responsibility to reducing the debt, but not killing off seniors and those in classrooms. I just came from speaking to Spelman College, a group of women in a historically black college, women who are ready to go out and serve America. And they realize that their education is a gift, but they want to give back to America. But this ridiculous $61 billion in cuts want to make sure that we don't have the American dream. And as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I sit and listen to those who are fighting the war of drug cartels on the border. But $400 million is going to be cut out of the Homeland Security funding so that it impacts ICE agents, it impacts Border Patrol agents, it impacts the intelligence gathering. These kinds of non-practical ways are undermining American and America's dream. 700,000 jobs is just the beginning. It's the floor. It's not the limit. And to those of you who seek a single tunnel view of how we run this country, have mercy on those who are in need. This is a wrong direction. Sit down at the bargaining